Welcome to the latest episode of Employment Talks, a Lydian podcast aimed at providing listeners practical insights into pressing employment law topics in Belgium.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first ever episode of Employment Talks, a Lydian podcast aimed at providing listeners practical insights into pressing employment law topics in Belgium. Employment Talks is a Lydian podcast. Lydian is a full-service Belgian business law firm with a practical and personalized approach to practicing law. Through a fine blend of transactional law expertise and litigation skills, we deliver straight, to-the-point solutions that add true value. We think client-focused, we act fast, and we speak frankly in a language that you understand. From our offices in Brussels, Antwerp, and Hasselt, our mission is to find solutions through excellent legal insight and strong business instinct. That is how we exceed expectations, deliver consistent results, and forge long-term relationships with industry leaders. Counting 17 lawyers, Lydian's employment, pensions, and benefits team is the largest team you will find in any independent Belgian full-service law firm. We take pride in the size of our team because of the responsiveness it allows us to bring to our clients every day. But even more so, we are proud of the expertise that comes with it. All 17 lawyers, from associate to partner level, advise clients on general employment law topics, from the start until the end of the employment relationship, and everything in between, both on an individual and a collective level. Additionally, every lawyer has specific fields of interest, ranging from privacy, health and safety, pensions and benefits, to internal investigations and international employment. My name is Kato Aerts. I'm a partner in the Employment, Pensions and Benefits Department of Lydian, and I'm delighted to be your podcast host. Today, I'm meeting with Sarah Witvrouw, Associate of the Employment, Pensions and Benefits Practice at Lydian and based in our Antwerp office. Sarah has been with Lydian for 2 years and a half. Her expertise spans individual and collective employment law. Last year, she was involved in many matters related to the EU Whistleblowing Directive, during which she developed a particular interest and expertise in relation to this topic. Sarah, welcome on the podcast. How are you today?
Very good, thank you. A new year and the first episode of a brand new podcast. I'm really looking forward to the episode of today as I find the subject of whistleblowing very interesting. And I'm feeling happy to share some information on this topic.
Perfect. Let's dive into it then. Could you perhaps explain to us what is a whistleblower?
A whistleblower is a person in a work environment who detects fraudulent behavior within the organization and decides to blow the whistle in good faith. This very act on itself puts the whistleblower in a very vulnerable position towards and within their organization. A proper protection is thus required. If the whistleblower could not be protected, he or she would not dare to speak up, and no one, not even within the organization, would become aware of the fraudulent or non-ethical behavior. And that is the very reason why it is in everyone's interest to create this framework of protection for a whistleblower. Companies often want to be aware of such behavior, and a better protection will enhance a speak up culture in the organization.
That's very clear. And could you perhaps also elaborate a bit on the legal framework for whistleblowing?
Of course. As most companies will already be aware of, a whistleblowing directive was adopted on 23 October 2019, providing minimum standards for an enhanced protection of whistleblowers. It provides a protection against retaliation measures and the possibility to file claims for damages if whistleblowers are retaliated against. The deadline for implementation of the directive was 17 December 2021. This deadline was, however, not met by the member states, including Belgium. But in the meantime, legislation has been adopted in Belgium, and we are going to talk about the Whistleblower Act of 28 November 2022 for private legal entities. This is the most widely applicable legislation and therefore the most relevant one to talk about on this podcast. In general, there are 3 ways to blow the whistle. The first one is via an internal channel within the company. This is what we are going to talk about today. Secondly, you can blow the whistle via an external channel. That will be an institution appointed by the Belgian legislator. And thirdly, via a public disclosure.
Okay, thank you for explaining those 3 ways to blow the whistle. And probably our listeners would want to know more about that internal channel because that relates to obligations for a company. Are all companies required to install such a channel?
Not all companies are required to install such channel. This depends generally on the number of employees that are employed within the organization. Private legal entities employing at least 50 employees have to install an internal whistleblowing channel. And there is an interesting note on that one, on the calculation of the threshold of these 50 employees. A new act will be adopted very soon, clarifying that companies have to verify each year on the 1st of January the number of employees employed during the last 4 quarters. If this exceeds the number of 50, an internal whistleblowing channel will have to be installed. There was some confusion before on how this calculation had to be made, since reference was made to the legislation on social elections, in which it is only required to make some calculations every 4 years. But it seems now that the Belgian legislator has cleared this up. You have to check the threshold every year. So private legal entities of 50 up to 249 employees had to install this internal channel by the end of last year, 17 December 2023. Bigger companies employing at least 250 employees, or companies providing financial services or services related to anti-money laundering or the prevention of terrorist financing, had to install the channel by 15 February 2023, regardless the number of employees employed. For those companies who have no internal channel today and should have, I would recommend to take action and set up such internal channel.
Yes, high time to do that. And then, of course, also note in the calendar on the very first day of January to check whether the threshold has been exceeded. Okay, so now that we know when the channel should be installed, what should it look like? Who should have access to the whistleblowing channel, and what type of information can be reported?
Well, at least employees should have access to the internal whistleblowing channel, but the legislation also provides the possibility to extend the scope of the channel to consultants, stockholders, trainees, voluntary workers, and so on, all who obtain the reported information in a work-related context. For companies providing financial services, anti-money laundering services, and prevention of terrorist financing services, the legislative text is unclear on the scope of the whistleblowing policy. The preparatory work seems to indicate that these companies should open up their internal channel to information received outside a work-related context. So keep this in mind if you fall within scope of this specific category of companies. The type of breaches that should be reported through the channel are mentioned in a list, such as public procurement, food and feed safety, consumer protection, and so on. Specifically for Belgium, the list mentions social and tax fraud as one of the matters that can also be reported. It is always possible as a company to expand the scope even more and, for instance, also allow for breaches on the code of conduct to be reported through the internal channel. But bear in mind that whistleblowers are generally protected against retaliation measures. So the message has to be clear on the scope of this whistleblowing policy.
Okay, understood. That's a very clear recommendation. And I wonder, can it be very simple to set up such an internal channel, or is it a lengthy and complicated process that all companies have to go through now?
Well, not at all. A company is free to decide on how to set up this channel. This can be via email or via a website, such as the whistleblower software website, as long as it is done in a secure and protective manner. There are, however, a number of formalities to comply with. A confirmation of receipt has to be given within 7 days. Of receipt of the notification, feedback has to be given within the 3 months following the receipt, and the confidentiality should be guaranteed, and so on. It is recommended to include the setup of this internal channel in a whistleblowing policy to keep flexibility along the way to make changes to this channel. The rules of social dialogue also have to be respected, and of course, all this has to be in compliance with the Belgian language requirements regarding the communication towards employees. Just like work rules have to be drafted in Dutch and French, depending on the location of the exploitation seat of the company, the communication related to whistleblowing has to be conducted in Dutch or French. Perhaps also an important remark in relation to setting up this whistleblowing channel, existing reporting lines remain intact. I refer to the rules in the Belgian Codex on Wellbeing at Work and the reporting lines for harassment involving the prevention advisor psychosocial risks. This is sometimes confusing for the employees who want to report, for instance, sexual transgressive behavior and do not know where to address their concern. to the prevention advisor, or through the whistleblowing directive. It is thus recommended to include very clear guidelines in the whistleblowing policy.
Yes, I agree with that. That is a question actually that has been raised many times by clients in the past year. And of course, you should keep in mind that there are already existing processes in Belgium for that type of complaints. Now, can the company rely on the whistleblowing channel implemented by, for instance, the American group company?
Well, in short, yes. However, there is a very strict interpretation by the EU Commission, and there are lots of other conditions in order to rely on the whistleblowing channel at the level of the group. A bit too many to go into detail here on this podcast. But one important thing is that, for instance, there needs to be an opt-out for the whistleblower who wants an investigation at local level by the local whistleblower officer. So bottom line is that it is always required to have a local small whistleblowing channel, as at least feedback should always be provided by a local whistleblower officer.
Okay. So perhaps one final question, Sarah, as we are nearing the end of our first podcast episode, what protection is offered to whistleblowers?
Whistleblowers are protected if, at the time of the report, they had reasonable grounds to believe that the reported information was truthful and fell within the scope of the law, and they either filed an internal or external report or made a public disclosure. So whistleblowers are protected against all kinds of retaliation measures, such as dismissal, negative performance reviews, lack of promotion opportunities, disciplinary sanctions, and so on. If notwithstanding this clear protection, a negative action is taken, whistleblowers and also their facilitators, family members, colleagues, and so on, who can suffer retaliation measures and legal entities related to these whistleblowers are all protected. Damages between 18 and 26 weeks' salary can be claimed by whistleblowing employees, and actual damages can be claimed by all other whistleblowers. The rules are here again a bit different if the report is related to a breach of financial services, the prevention of terrorist financing, and the prevention of anti-money laundering. In latter case, employees can claim up to 6 months of damages, and they have a right to reinstatement instead of those damages. This type of compensation cannot be cumulated with damages for unfair dismissal. So in the end, whistleblowers are indeed way better protected now when blowing the whistle. And this is a very good evolution for enhancing a speak up environment. However, it also requires some action from the companies as well.
That's very clear. Thank you so much, Sarah. That's all the time we have today. Many thanks for taking the time to record this first episode of Employment Talks with me. I hope you enjoyed it a lot, and I hope our listeners did too. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Well, I really enjoyed it. It was the first time for me to talk on a podcast, and I really look forward to next time.
The last words go out to everyone who tuned in for this episode of Employment Talks. I hope the content of this episode was as entertaining and interesting for you as it was for me. If you have any questions in relation to the topic we brought to you today, of course, feel free to reach out to Sarah or to myself. If you do not have our contact details yet, make sure to visit us at our website www.lydian.be or simply reach out through LinkedIn. This was Employment Talks, a Lydian podcast. If you liked this episode, please make sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts, and feel free to leave a comment or share it with people you think may be interested in it too. We look forward to hearing from you, and we would love to welcome you again in 2 weeks' time for our next episode.
This was Employment Talks, a Lydian podcast. If you liked this episode, please make sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts, and feel free to leave a comment or share it with people you think may be interested too. We look forward to hearing from you, and we would love to welcome you again in 2 weeks for our next episode.